You know, there's really no housing crisis. There's a wealth protection plan. The GTA market reset, as I call it. What's actually happening and what isn't. So, folks, buckle up. I think this is going to be a long one because I'm going to hit every button I can. So, let's start with the facts, not the headlines, not the TikTok posts. From the late 1990s, let's say 98, 99, through to 2021, the Toronto housing market went through one of the longest appreciation cycles in modern Canadian history. Yeah. Now, depending on the index you use, nominal price growth averaged, well, roughly mid-single to high single digits. Annually, over more than 2 decades, it averages out to about 7.4. Now, some years were modest, low single-digit gains in the early 2000s, near flat growth around that little financial crisis that we had. And then other years, well, they were explosive. Double-digit growth in 2016, and again during the pandemic surge in 2020 and 2021. Now, there were a couple of corrections along the way, and the most notable was 2018, where prices fell roughly 4.6, 4.7%, and that was following the stress tests and some tighter lending rules. But, those corrections were temporary. The long-term trend was very clear. Sustained appreciation. And the Prime Minister at the time even said that. Now, that kind of growth is not normal, and more importantly, like I've been saying for years, it's not sustainable. Markets don't move in straight lines. When prices rise, when they rise faster than incomes or rents and productivity for, long terms or long enough, the system builds up pressure. And eventually, something has to give. Boom. Except it's not a boom, it's just a bang. What we're seeing now in the GTA, in my opinion, it's not a crash, it's not a collapse. It's a rebalancing or a reset or a reboot, if you will, even, using today's terms. The post-2022 price declines are the result of three, in my opinion, again, three very specific forces. Number one was the rapid interest rate increases, which immediately reduced purchasing power. It set affordability ceilings where buyers simply hit the wall of what monthly payments allow. You can't get that house because you can't afford the monthly payment. And with that comes what we called a pullback in confidence. Not people, they didn't stop wanting homes, but they stopped buying them because they were uncertain. And when everybody's uncertain, that creates a pause. So that combination slows demand. And when demand slows, prices soften. It's not failure. That's how markets work. It's, simple economics 101. I like the math. This downturn isn't about fundamentals breaking. Our population remains strong. Supply remains constrained. Land approvals and, construction costs, well, they haven't suddenly become cheap. What changed, really, was the cost of money and the speed at which it changed. That's what kind of threw everybody. So when you hear constant negative boosters, like everybody putting in their 5 cents and you know, this is the beginning of the end. Doomsday is coming. Be prepared. This is a 20-year cycle. Understand what they're really reacting to. It's not a collapse. It's normalization after a very abnormal run. Or, you know, they may just want more followers or need more Google juice, so they're ranting in front of the TV or in front of the cameras. Most reasonable forecasts, including those from, lenders, economists, and realtors, or people who are actively inside this market, we're all pointing to stabilization as rates ease and the confidence returns. It's not a V-shaped rebound. It's not another speculative frenzy, but it's a period of leveling out, followed by, a slower, much slower, and more sustainable growth. Now, no one has a crystal ball, but this isn't chaos. It's simple math. And everybody who knows me knows I love math. But here's where the conversation usually gets very uncomfortable. But, I think it matters, so I'm going to keep going. Now, everybody agrees we have a bit of a housing crisis. What we don't agree on is whether we actually want it fixed. Yep, there I said it. I said it because for millions of people, this so-called crisis, well, it isn't a failure. It's a feature. It's a feature of a system that rewards timing. If you own a home, your wealth has grown quietly in the background for years, decades. It's grown in the background. You bought a house 20 years ago. You just didn't buy shelter. Back then, you bought an asset that benefited from scarcity, policy, and demographic pressure. And we've told ourselves a little story about that. We all call it discipline, or some of us call it responsibility. People may even call it adulthood. But timing isn't virtue, and equity isn't morality. In Ontario, housing stopped being about a shelter long time ago. It became a retirement investment. It became security. It became status. To some, it even became a scoreboard. And once your home becomes your future, any threat to its value, well, that kind of feels personal, doesn't it? Even if that threat is someone else finally being able to live here. Yeah, and to me, that's why this problem never gets solved. It's not because we don't know how to fix the problem. It's not because there's no land. It's not because there's no capital or no viable models. We have all those. But because fixing it would require us all admitting something that is deeply, deeply uncomfortable. You cannot make housing more affordable without reducing the rate at which, some people build wealth. Yeah, I said it. You can't fix scarcity without upsetting those who benefit from it. And the people who benefit from it, well, they all vote. And the politicians, well, they want to keep their jobs. They don't do what's right. They need to keep their jobs. So instead we compromise. We delay. Maybe even moralize. We say we support affordability, just as long as it's not on our street. We tell the young people well, save harder. We tell them that in an economy where rent consumes more than half their income and where prices rose faster than wages have ever or could ever. And then there's some of us who blame the investors because it feels good. Or we blame Airbnb because it's visible. But investors, well, they didn't break the system. They just understood it. The truth is, it's a harsh truth, but every generation says the market is broken. They say that right up until they're on the right side of it. This isn't a housing shortage. It's a values conflict. And until we're honest about, who the system protects and, who it quietly excludes, maybe, this crisis doesn't end. Because deep down, we don't hate the housing crisis. We just hate that we're not all winning from it. Yeah. The housing crisis will end the moment that all of us, we all decide that homes are for living first, and investing second. And that moment or that time, well, it's sad to say, but it hasn't arrived yet. And it hasn't arrived yet because we're still asking the wrong questions. Not how do we make housing affordable, but how do we fix this without anyone losing anything? And the honest answer is, we can't. It's that simple. That's the trade-off. That's the tension. There isn't a housing crisis. There's a wealth protection plan. And renters, or the young people, they were never written into it. Yeah. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to be clear about one thing, or maybe a couple things. I'm not saying any of this from the sidelines. None of it. Like I said, I see it every day. I'm a real estate broker working in the GTA. I've been in this market through booms, through pullbacks, through stress tests, rate shocks, and emotional cycles. I've worked with buyers who felt, completely priced out. I've worked with sellers who felt stuck, and families trying to make life decisions in a market full of noise, loud noise. So my thoughts are, experience matters in moments like this, because this market doesn't reward panic, and it doesn't punish patience. It rewards clarity, timing, and understanding. You got to understand how the numbers actually work today. Not go off on a rant, and not how they worked 5 years ago. Sometimes not even how they worked 5 months ago. So whether you're thinking about buying, selling, or just trying to figure out where you stand, you don't need the hype. You don't need the fear. You need context. You need strategy. And you need someone who understands, both sides of the economics. And, of course, the human side of these decisions. Some would say, that's what I do. I do it every day. I help other people do every day. I help agents who work in my brokerage try to make sense of that. So if you're trying to make sense of the market, not guess, not gamble, but make a smart, informed move, call me or call my brokerage. Let's talk it through. No pressure, no script, just real numbers, real options, and an honest plan that fits you are right now, fits where you are right now. Because markets change, headlines fade, but good advice at the right time, well, I think that still matters. I'm Michael Baumler. I'm out.